Hello and welcome to this special manufacturing management live event. My name is Chris Beck, manufacturing management's editor, and I'm joined today by Simon Badger, the managing director of software company 123 Insight. Simon today is going to be giving us an introduction, an MRP 101, if you like, to manufacturing software. And in particular, what MRP is and how it can benefit manufacturers of all sizes. So if you're thinking about updating or upgrading your current MRP system, then this is a session to pay particularly close attention to. For now, I'll hand over to Simon. I'll be chipping in here and there with some questions, hopefully. But for now, Simon, over to you.
Lovely, thanks, Chris. Okay, guys. So look, as Chris said, this is kind of an MRP 101. As 123 Insight, we are kind of experts in the field of MRP, ERP, and all things manufacturing. It's what we do. So look, in this session, we are going to take you through a little bit of the history of MRP, a little bit about the benefits of MRP, and show you some MRP in action as well. So it is a kind of a fairly basic level, probably the next sort of 30 minutes or so, just focusing on this. So to start with, when we talk about MRP, and people in industry will often talk about running MRP or needing an MRP system. Generally, they're meaning one of two things, and we don't often divide that up and specify which one we mean. And this is all linked in with the history of MRP, and we'll cover in a second. But the two things that they mean is either material requirements planning, which is the initial or original kind of acronym for MRP, or manufacturing resource planning, which is more accurately called MRP2. But most of the time nowadays, when people talk about MRP, they mean manufacturing resource planning, that MRP2. Like I said, we'll cover that a bit in a minute. You'll also hear the term ERP or enterprise resource planning bandied around. So we'll cover that as well and just explain the differences there. To start with then, let's just clarify the three main objectives of MRP. And this is going kind of way back to the origins of MRP as a concept. But firstly, it's about having availability of the things that you need. So ensuring that the things that you need are there when you need them. It's also about the inventory and making sure that you have kind of the minimum level of inventory. Now, you can put buffer in most systems, but the original philosophy was to have the minimum inventory that's needed in order to perform as a company, as a factory, as a manufacturer. And it's also about planning and purchasing. So being able to buy the things that you need, having some strategic view of that, and having planning ability over your shop floor and over your procurement. So those are kind of the three main objectives of an MRP ERP system. We'll look now at some of the benefits of a good system. And look, by good system, I kind of mean two things. I mean, good software that is well implemented. You have to have those two. Have the best software in the world. If it's not well implemented, then you're kind of on a hiding to nothing. If you implement a bad system very well, you'll probably get better results than taking a very good system and not implement it well at all. So the kind of weighting there is on the implementation side. It's about how you've tailored and how you've structured your company around that system and the system around your company and getting those things together. And look, when we talk about systems in manufacturing as well, people think we're always talking about the software. We're talking about much more than that in reality. So your system that you have in place, any company-wide system or management information system, such as an MRP or an ERP system, they're comprising not just of the software, but it's also about the people knowing what they're doing with it. It's also about the processes you have in place and the data that you put into it. So that kind of concept of a system is a little bit wider than just the software itself. And keep that in mind when I talk through these benefits, that we're talking about that kind of wider system view here. So a good MRP system will give you at least four things out. So it's going to improve the efficiency of your business. So things like streamlining the processes and reducing errors as you go through. It will give you greater control over quality and cost and delivery, those kind of key elements there for business success. It'll also give you lots of analysis and feedback, so the ability to kind of produce KPIs and things out of the system and to really see how you're performing and adjust where you need to. And it will also give you traceability. Now, more important for some industries than others, but for some of you guys, traceability is going to be absolutely vital. I know I've got a customer that has to give a 500-year warranty, 500 years on everything they produce. they need extreme traceability. And we'll talk a little bit more about traceability in a sec. Let's take these in turn. I'm not going to labor too long on this, but I just want to kind of give you guys this sense of some of the benefits, particularly if you're looking at an MRP system for the first time. So in terms of efficiency, what should an MRP system bring to you? Well, think about things like stock control. So having the right stuff around when you need it. Manufacturers can often find that they've got lots and lots of stuff, but it's not necessarily the right stuff. And you know, one of the foibles really of manufacturing is that you can have an expensive unit that you've kind of 99.99% completed, but for the tuppence little bit of metal extrusion or something that you need that has to be a very precise fit, for that kind of tiny little part, you could not ship. I mean, it could hold you up, stop you shipping, stop you invoicing. That's kind of the life we've chosen in manufacturing. But MRP systems are there to solve that kind of pain. If you think about purchasing and planning, well, it's reducing the manpower that goes into those kind of decision-making processes in the business around the planning, around what we need to make and what we need to buy. And that's kind of essentially the heart of MRP. We'll cover that a bit more later on. Think about sort of batch sizing, so making efficient batches, being able to see where things could be made together, making the right amount, not having to completely set up and rework and go sort of double batching back to back and things, but actually being able to consolidate stuff and to make sensible amounts at the right time in the right kind of quantity. And then there's also efficiency for warehousing. Knowing where your stock is really very key. I've seen so many companies over the years that know they have stock, but finding the right parts can be problematic. And look, a well-implemented MRP system will help you in that area just in spades. It's going to really deliver for your company in terms of knowing what's going on and where stuff is. If we talk about control that a system like this would give you, well, if it's well implemented again, it's going to give you good control over your build configuration. So having things like drawing numbers, issue numbers associated with parts, making sure that you're building the right issue and revision of a particular product, as opposed to building something that that should have been obsoleted a couple of years ago, those kind of things. As well as giving you a good visibility and control over the shop floor, so job scheduling, by resource, by employee, by tooling and skill levels and those kind of things, being able to see what's on the shop floor, what needs to go through, and where those bottlenecks are, and to help you do something about those bottlenecks as well. In terms of warehousing and stock check, well, we've already talked about having the right stuff around you at the right time, but tools around stock checking so that you can keep on top of that and keep that accurate. And also things around concessions and quarantine, you know, making sure that stock that shouldn't be going into parts is held off separately as well. And then we've got control around batches, lots, serial numbers, recording things around batches and, you know, expiry dates on goods and things like that. All those kind of things that without a system in place would take lots and lots of effort and lots of time to get right. And inherently as well, incorporate a lot of mistakes, human kind of mistakes, without a good system in place. Moving on then to kind of analysis and feedback. Well, systems such as this are really good at giving you analysis on your business, or the ability to analyze and drill down into the business. And look, I always think about it like, you know, an aeroplane is kind of 99% of the time, an aeroplane is not flying in the right direction. You know that if you think about it, it's obviously true, because we all kind of think, well, if you're flying from London to New York, you're going in a perfectly straight line. They don't. That's what instruments are there for in the plane, in the cockpit, is that, well, you go off slightly, you come back. You go off slightly, you come back. It's all about adjustment. And look, it's really the same in business, isn't it? We should be able to measure our businesses and adjust as we go to make sure that we're coming back on track. And so MRP systems will typically give you things like plan versus actual reporting. So, you know, what we thought it was going to cost us, or how long we thought it was going to take us compared to what it actually did, and where it took longer, why, and where it took less time or less money, why. The production and purchasing kind of efficiency we've spoken about already, but that real focus on quality, cost and delivery that is so important to manufacturers. As well as keeping all this data forever. So you've got historical data going back, enabling you to see trends and improve over time. And obviously kind of weekly, monthly, daily KPIs coming out of the system to give you performance indicators on every department within the business. So these are the kind of feedbacks that you can get from a well-implemented MRP system. Talking about traceability, I said we'd come back to this one. So look, if you think about the 4 M's, so materials, manpower, methods, and machines, in highly traceable industries, you need to have reference to all of those things. So we need to know, for example, exactly what material went into our goods. Now, for some of you guys, that would be very relevant. If you're working to aviation specs or medical specs, extremely relevant and important to know exactly what material went in. And for some of the rest of you, that would be less important. You don't absolutely have to know what batch or serial number of goods went into those. But think then about manpower. So knowing which operator has worked on a job and how long they took, knowing which tools that they used to do it, knowing that the methods, the process that was followed was the correct one and the current revision of that process, which machines were used, those kind of things. Having that traceability and all of that is a great strength of these kind of systems. And this is all about appropriateness. So a good system will allow you to set the level of traceability you need at an appropriate point so that you're not kind of pumping information into the system that you don't need to record. But just by virtue of doing your day-to-day job, this stuff's getting captured where it's important to you. So let's move on now. We're going to talk very quickly about the evolution of MRP. So a short history lesson. For those of you who don't like history, I promise I'll keep it very short here. But you know, I'm kind of a little bit geeky with this kind of stuff. I like this kind of stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about the evolution of MRP simply because it sets the direction. It lets you know kind of why MRP exists and what it's trying to achieve. So we're going to start, I've got a timeline here. We're going to start talking kind of circa 1900, that sort of period where we had the kind of automotive manufacturers setting up and starting to build cars for the first time and really requiring greater control over purchasing and over stock than had been previously the case. Now, they didn't computerize it in 1900. That wasn't what was going on there. But these guys did start to put in sort of the 2-bin systems and things like that you probably know and maybe love or hate, you know, having a 2 kind of bin level and reordering based on cards or tickets, just doing that kind of stock check control. If we come forward then to the 1940s, well, you know, the Second World War was a big driver of industry and innovation. Kind of sad to say, but true. And so we had kind of lead times and the formalization of bill of materials in this point. So, you know, controlled bill of materials, controlled drawings for how something should be reproduced. And if you're talking about fighter aircraft and things, that's very important. So this kind of moved from more of a craft industry really formally over into something where everything's formalized, everything is now controlled with drawings and structures behind things, and so things are always done in the same way. Coming into the 1950s, and you can see the Toyota logo there. So in the 1950s, following the kind of Second World War, we start to see the economic miracle of Japan. And so particularly in the Toyota Corporation, we have Tachiono, who was one of the engineers at Toyota, working with the, I think, general manager there, the Ijai Toyota. They set in place something called the Toyota production system. Any of you that have studied lean manufacturing, interested in lean, will have come across the TPS, the Toyota production system. But it's really from that we have this kind of big push on efficiency, this big push at doing things in a much smarter way, a more efficient way, and a reduction of waste. And the reason I'm putting that in there is because that comes up right at the inception of the kind of MRP systems. At the same time, really, so through the 1950s into the 1960s, we have the likes of General Electric, Rolls-Royce with their aircraft and electronics and things like that, computerizing their inventory system. So really starting to take benefit from the new computer systems that are out there and computerizing their inventory rather than paper-based stock records. Now, if we fast forward to kind of 1964, you'll see on the timeline here, I should highlight these for you actually. There we go. So we have this chap here, Joe Orlicki or Joseph Orlicki. Now he worked at IBM and he studied the Toyota production system. He went and looked at what Toyota were doing and how they were making these cars more efficiently and to high quality compared to what others could do. And out of that, while he was working at IBM, he started to work on computerized material planning and processing. So really started to computerize this stuff. And we're starting to get the shift now from just individual companies computerizing their records to a more generalistic, well, here's something that we can launch into the market. The first company, and many would say, to do this was Black & Decker. So in the late 1960s, going into the 70s, they were really the first company to have something that resembled an MRP system and material requirements planning at that point, rather than manufacturing resource planning. So looking at those materials and what they needed. Let's fast forward up until today. So 1965, IBM, and this is going back to the work of Joe Orlicki and others. So IBM produced BOMP, which is Bill of Materials Processing, a database system. In 1975, Joe Orlicki publishes his book, which is Material Requirements Planning, and that kind of MRP acronym is born and officially out in the marketplace. Come forward 6 years into 1981, and Oliver White publishes his very famous book, Manufacturing Resource Planning, which is MRP2, and that's the thing I said that we mostly talk about and call MRP today. And then if we come forward into the 90s, we start to see the advent of the term ERP, which we'll talk about a bit more in a second. And hey, look, We123 Insight were founded in the year 2000. At the time, the only company, as far as any of us are aware, who were providing an ERP, MRP type system on a subscription basis, a true subscription basis, long before software as a service was something that was a household name. So we've been doing this a long time. And look, here's our business growth over the years. So, considering we're supplying into the manufacturing world, our business growth is pretty good in that direction. Let's move on then. So that was my brief history lesson. I'm just going to cover the concepts very quickly here of, well, what is the difference between MRP, MRP2 and ERP? So look, when we're talking about MRP, it's material requirements planning in that kind of true sense of that MRP acronym. And what does it mean? Well, it's having the parts around you that you need and having them when you need them. Those are the kind of two things: how much you need and when do you need it. And so that was going back to 1975 and Joe Orlicki's book that we mentioned just now. These computer systems started to come out. By the way, by about early 1980s, there would have been about 8,000, 10,000 companies using MRP systems by about 1981, 1982. So that gives you a sense of the growth of these kind of systems. In 1985, we had that book released 1981, we had that book released by Oliver White, which was Manufacturing Resource Planning, or MRP2. And this kind of added in a whole load of concepts now to that original material requirements planning. So we add in the resourcing in that is looking at resources or work centers in the factory and looking at capacity. So it considers capacity in that MRP algorithm, in that rule-based kind of running of MRP. It also looks at scheduling of those resources and so slotting jobs in to where they can go. We have a concept called master production scheduling, which is all about when stuff is needed and how much is needed. And the ability to forecast demand as well as just having sales orders going in. So the ability to forecast customer demand and respond to forecasts ahead of time. Along with that, we start to see things like part records, including lots and lots of data like drawing numbers, revision numbers, and other bits of data that would be useful to manufacturers. If we fast forward then into the early 1990s, that term ERP tends to become used, and that's what we hear a lot of these days. And that's really just building upon the concepts of MRP2 again. But this is now enterprise resource planning. This is very simple. Think about the whole enterprise rather than just the manufacturing and purchasing elements. And so now it's kind of adding managing sort of tools for other departments, such as the marketing department with CRM, the finance department with accounts tools and things built into the system. And so that's the evolution of MRP through to ERP. And that's what we've looked at in terms of that timeline we had up just now. But these are basically the different concepts that you have here. And most of the time when people talk about an MRP system nowadays, they're really talking about this MRP2 in the middle here. Many MRP2 systems will incorporate all of the original MRP, and perhaps some of what we would term as ERP in terms of wider concepts within the business. So we're going to move on now just to our kind of final sections here. In this case, we're going to have a look at MRP in action. I'm going to explain to you what MRP kind of does. So you'll hear people talking about, well, I ran MRP overnight, and these are the suggestions I got out of it. Let's talk about what that actually is, that MRP process. So look, the main, I guess the main in a nutshell, what MRP is trying to do, the main philosophy behind it is it's matching supply and demand. I haven't said that yet today. Hopefully that's been implicit in everything I've said. But if you think about MRP in this way, this is the easiest way to think about it. What is MRP trying to do? It matches supply and demand in your business. So if we have demand, which could be, for example, a sales order, customer orders some parts, do we have supply to meet that? And do we have that supply at the right time? And the mission of MRP is to make sure that that is there when you need it. And at its heart, MRP is actually, it's an algorithm. It's a code that's run in the background of the software that does that calculation for you. The beauty of it is it can do that over thousands of items in a far, far shorter space of time than a human being would be able to do it. So we're going to talk about that process a little bit here. It's simplified. I'm not going into coding, I promise. So this is a simplified view of the MRP process. Look, to start with, we have some inputs into the process. So we'll have some sales order demand, for example, or maybe we'll have a forecast. So if we haven't got a sales order, we might have a customer forecast. We might have some parts that have gone below their minimum stock levels, or some items that have gone below a reorder level. These kind of things are inputs into MRP. These are the things that give us demand. So demand is kind of our main input. Now, when MRP processes, it's looking at a number of things. So it's looking at existing orders coming in, so works orders and purchase orders we've already raised, and it's looking at stock, and it's comparing those things to the demand. But in doing that, it's also taking into account some part rules. Now, part rules might be things like a minimum stock level you set on a particular part, or a minimum batch size that you have to buy from that supplier. So it can take those kind of rules into account. And it's looking at the capacity in the factory. So if we're talking about manufacturing resource planning, or MRP2, which is what most people mean, it will also be considering that capacity. And that goes through the MRP process. So this algorithm that is looking at all these parts and all these kind of demands and things in the system very quickly is considering all these things. What we get from that is a number of outputs. So at the other side of the MRP process, we're going to have some purchasing suggestions, so some things that it thinks we should buy, or perhaps some suggestions to cancel some purchase orders that it thinks we don't need. The same on the production side, some suggestions for works orders, or maybe to cancel or postpone or reschedule some works orders, and a capacity plan. So those are the kind of main outputs that you would get from an MRP2 type system. So inputs, the demand that's going in, the MRP process is considering that demand along with looking at the supply that we've got. And supply is stock, orders that are already committed to come in, and works orders that we're already committed to make. And then the outputs of that process are some suggestions for purchasing actions, things to buy, things to reschedule to a different date or quantity, and things to cancel. Production actions, things to make, things to reschedule to a different quantity or date, and things to cancel, and capacity planning. So that's kind of a nutshell of the MRP process. I promise it's a lot more complex than that under the hood, but if you can grasp those concepts, that's enough to work with an MRP system, and pretty much any system that's out there. So we'll take an example in a second, but I'm going to just clue you into that example first. So in my example, I'm going to be a fictitious company today, and we're going to be making computers. So there's kind of an example computer up on screen. We'll be making something like that. Now that computer is made of 4 basic parts. So that we're calling it the PC 1000, that's the part number. And that's going to be made out of, there we go, a base unit, which is the BU 1000, a hard drive, a keyboard, and a mouse. So 4 kind of basic components. The trick comes here that the base unit itself, that's not a purchase part. So the pink ones here are the purchase parts. The blue one is a sub-assembly. This is a sub-assembly, and this is made out of 2 purchase parts, which is a motherboard and some memory. So those things have to come together to make my base unit. The base unit, the hard drive, the keyboard, and the mouse go together to make my PC. So that's what we call a bill of materials, a very simplified bill of materials. This one happens to have 3 levels. So I've got my kind of top level, then I've got my middle level, then my lower level there with the motherboard and the memory. If we look at that, how MRP will look at it though. So let's go over now sort of look through MRP's eyes. So MRP sees the PC 1000 and imagine there's some demand for this. Now, if there's no demand for it, MRP is not going to care about it. So when we run that MRP tool within a system, it's looking for demand. In this case, maybe I have a sales order. And so my sales order is there to say, look, we need 100 of these PCs or something. And so MRP spots that demand. And that is what we call the level 1 demand. So the top level, the saleable part demand, in this case is my level 1 demand. What MRP then does with that is starts constructing something called a master production schedule. We don't need to go into that today, but it starts constructing basically a list of all the demand that it's got and when that is. And so we've got our PC 1000 demand. MRP will now look down that chain and it will come up with a level 2 demand, which is for the base unit, the hard drive, the keyboard, and the mouse. I need some of these if I'm going to fulfill my order for the PC 1000. So we haven't got any stock of the PC 1000. Do we have any stock of the base unit, the hard drive, the keyboard, and the mouse that we need to make it? That's my level 2 demand. And maybe we've got some of those things in place. Maybe we've got nothing. And then once it's done that, obviously it's going to go down to the 3rd level here, which is my memory stick and my motherboard, and look at the demand at those levels. So have I got stock around me? Have I got orders coming in? What do I need in terms of memory sticks and motherboards in order to make my base units? What do I need in terms of base units, hard drives, keyboards, and mice to make my PC? That's MRP's view of the world. That's how it looks at things. So it's going to start at that top level and work its way down, looking at demand and supply as we go. Now, along the way, it's obviously applying those rules that we talked about, so the part rules, and it's looking at our capacity as well, and what we need to buy and what we need to make. So having explained that concept, we're going to dive very quickly here into our software. So we're going to dive into 123 Insights. Ignore the fact that I'm logged in as Janet today. Janet's my super user. Should have changed that before I had that up. She can do anything. So for demo purposes, I'm logged in as Janet. And look, on the screen here, I've got an example that matches the one I had up on PowerPoint just now. So this is my PC 1000. I use a mouse, a hard drive, a keyboard, and a base unit. The base unit itself is made out of a motherboard and of some RAM, in this case 64 gigabytes of RAM. And look, so the base unit is an assembled part. It is a sub-assembly. The motherboard, the memory, the keyboard, the hard drive, and the mouse, they're all purchase parts. And so they're using those pink icons here. That's peculiar to our interface. That's not a general rule. I don't think it is. And by the way, I've also got some routing in here, some operator steps that we go through. So I'm saying when we put this PC together, we also do some assembly and we do some inspection to do it. And that's actually what feeds in to the capacity plan in a minute. So let's go and put that, I'm going to put the sales order on. So we will just put a quick sales order in here to put some demand into the system. So I'm going to say here, look, my customer, General Engineering, and it's actually my friend Jim Brown at General Engineering. He's on the phone. And he's got a purchase order for me, which is purchase order 1234. So I'm putting in a basic sales order here. And what's Jim going to buy? Well, believe it or not, he wants to buy some PCs. Very convenient for this particular demo because that's what I've been talking about. And he wants 100 of those. Now I can do all kinds of things here. We can go around and look and see what material I've got and whether I can make any and whether I've got any in stock and where they're coming from and all those kind of things. We'll ignore all of that for now. I'm just going to say, look, I've got 100 due and we're going to ship them in a few weeks' time. So let's say we're going to ship them, I'll do, in fact, I'll go into March. Let's do the 11th of March then. I'll put a price into these as well. Why not? May as well make some money while we're at it. So it's a good £100,000 order, really good order there. Let's save that. And that's put some demand into my system. So I'm not, my aim here isn't to show you our software particularly today. I just want to show putting that demand into the system. So think about this now at this top level here, the PC 1000, the saleable part, we've got demand in, we've got a sales order in place. I'm going to let you into a little secret. I don't have any stock of any of these lower parts. So to keep it really clean here, I put no stock in place There are no orders coming in. So we're going to go now and run MRP. Now, lots of systems still out there, you would run MRP overnight or something just because it takes a long time to run. We don't have those problems. 123 is blindingly quick to run the MRP. And so while you're watching this, it's kind of blink and you'll miss it. But I'm going to run it here by hitting this little cog at the bottom. So I'm going to start a manual MRP run rather than something timed. When I do this, if you look over just this right-hand side here, you see level 1, level 2, level 3, it's gone. But very quickly, it looked down those levels that I talked about earlier. And out of that now, we have some suggestions. So I'm going to have some suggestions of things to do on production. So it's saying, look, I think you should make some PC1000s. And I think you should make some base units to go into those PC1000s. Those PC1000s, you need them on the 10th. And to get those made in time, you should start that. The very latest to start that is the 3rd. And by the way, those base units, you'll need those on the 3rd, but they're pretty quick to make. So you can start those on the 3rd as well. You can have those done within the day. So those are my works order suggestions there. Let's go and have a quick look at the purchasing side. So on the purchasing side here, it's saying, well, hey, Simon, I want you to buy now some keyboards, some hard drives, some mice, some motherboards, and some memory. And if I move my quantity column over here like that, you can see it's asking me to buy 100 of each of those apart from the motherboard where it's gone for 108. And look, that's because I've got a minimum quantity in place on that motherboard. So I want to hold 8 in stock at the end of the day. And so it said, well, you're going to use 100 of them. You've got none at the moment. Let's have 8 extra of those to put that minimum stock in. Let's play with one of our other rules here. So I'm just going to show you this. I'm going to run MRP again, but let's go to the mouse and have a look. I'm going to change one of those part rules. So on this mouse here, let's say that my supplier, which are these guys, SR Components, you don't know this, but these guys are in the States. Because they're in the States, I want to buy a minimum of, let's say a minimum of 200 at a time, like that. And I buy them in boxes of 50. So we'll save that information in there. So here's my current MRP suggestion, is buy 100 mice, because that's what you need, 100 mice. Let's just run that again, MRP. So it's going to have a quick thing again, level 1, 2, 3, you might have seen on the screen. By the way, you're not limited to 3 levels. That is just for this example today. You can go down as many levels as you need to. But okay, MRP's now had a think again. Out of that, we've got some purchasing suggestions. Let's have a quick look here. Notice the mouse now, it's now suggesting I buy a minimum of 200 because that's the part rules that I put around it. So MRP is doing this job of matching supply and demand, but considering rules that we put into the system. Let's put one more in very quickly. I'm going to go back to the mouse again. So on the mouse, I'm now going to say, but look, I also want to hold a minimum quantity. I want to hold, let's say I want to hold a box of 50 on the shelf. So I never want to run out of mice. I always want to have 50 around me on the shelf. So we're putting a minimum stock in. Obviously, at the moment, I have 0 in stock. Let's see what MRP says. You can probably guess at this point. So MRP goes away, does its calculations. Again, level 1, 2, 3, pretty quick. Comes back, and this is what we have now. Look at the mouse. So it's now saying, well, buy 200 because that 100 that you've got is for the PCs. Over the top of that, you've got another 100 in stock, which gives me my 50, doesn't it? It's a bad example. Let's do this. There we go. Let me change that very quickly. I want to hold 150. That's what I meant to do there. I want 150 on the shelf at any one point in time. Quick rerun of MRP. It's fortunate that it's so quick, isn't it? Then if I make a mistake, I can do it very quickly. There's my mouse. And now it's saying, look, buy 250 because you want 150 on the shelf as your minimum stock quantity, and you need 100 for that job. And in fact, if I look at what's going to happen with this, let's have a look at the future movements and what's going to happen with that particular part over time. Well, here is what's going to happen. If I didn't have any MRP running, I would have just no mice. So without MRP, I have no mice. But if we do what MRP says, we will buy 250 mice, and they'll get here by the 3rd of the 3rd. And so that gives me 250 in stock. And then I'm going to use 100 mice onto a works order to build PC 1000. Let's stretch that across a little. And that'll leave me with the 150, which I have said is my minimum stock level. And you can see that up there. So listen, what I've been showing you here is on our system, 123 Insight. These things are true for all kind of MRP systems. To a greater or lesser extent, they all work largely the same. Our MRP, we're particularly proud of the MRP algorithm in this system. It's very, very fast, like I say, and everyone can keep working in the system while you're running it. That's not always universally true. But look, it is an overview of MRP, and for that purpose, just using some of our software. So that was our MRP demo. I think just to summarize what we've covered today, in terms of what we've learned, well, I've done a very brief intro of MRP for you, the difference between MRP, MRP2, which is what we normally mean when we say MRP, and ERP. We've looked at the history, the evolution of MRP and ERP. We've talked about the expected benefits that you can get from a well-implemented system. Remember, that system is not just the software. That is also how you put it together with your business, the processes that you put in place, the training level for the people and things like that. And we've done a very brief demo of MRP, showing how MRP does that processing and looks at those parts that we need to buy and those parts that we need to make. So guys, with that, I'm going to hand over to Chris just to see if Chris has got any questions at this point, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Simon, or should that be Janet?
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, a couple of quick questions, really. If a manufacturer is looking to either implement a new MRP system or upgrade or switch providers in any way, what would you say are the kind of key things that they need to look out for? What makes a good MRP or ERP system?
A really fundamental one is ease of use. So if you're talking about looking at some software, which is what we're talking about here, you want something that your operators can learn to drive. You want something that's not going to tie them in knots, that's not going to stop any progress that they want to make. And so ease of use is a big one. There are all kinds of bells and whistles and things out there. There are all kinds of different interfaces and different ways of displaying this sort of software. But at the end of the day, you want something that people can get on with and people can use. Because no matter how powerful that software is, if your operators aren't interfacing well with it, if they're not able to use it and if they're not able to learn it swiftly, then, well, several things are going to happen. One, your implementation will take much, much longer. And look, in our industry, implementations very typically are 18 months plus. Not true for us, by the way. Definitely not true for us. We measure our implementations in weeks, not months. But typically implementations are long. And also there's a much higher chance of failure. So if a system is put together in a way that it is complex for operators to use, then there's a high probability of failure and it'll take much longer to get in. So I would suggest the starting point is look at ease of use. Against that, you need to weigh up and say, well, what do we absolutely need as a business out of this system? So these are kind of our minimum things that we need from the system. And look, this is how easy to use these systems are. We have a unique approach to this as well. So I've got on screen here, you're welcome to attend a 123 Insight evaluation workshop. Look, we don't go around and try and sell 123 to different companies. It's not our approach. Our approach is very much we lay our store out. And look, anyone watching this webinar is very welcome to get in touch with us. Come on one of our events where we will demonstrate the software and answer any questions. People can really kind of see how it works from that point of view. And also, we do something which is really unique in the industry. And I know I'm kind of pitching a little bit here, but bear with me. This is unique, and it helps with the thing I've just said, which is when people are looking at our system and they're kind of thinking, we think this is right for us. That kind of final step is risky. When you're thinking, yeah, I think this is right for us, this is the way to go. Generally, software vendors at that point expect you to place an order with lots of money behind it. What we're saying is, well, at that point, don't place an order with us. Come on the training, experience the software in full. We call it no obligation training. You get to use the system fully. You get 6 core days of training to totally understand everything that you need to know. And at the end of that process is when you make the decision as to whether you register as a customer and pay for 123 Insight or whether you don't. Obviously, we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is. We know that the conversion of people coming on to training there to actually saying, yeah, this is definitely right for us, is really high, like touching 100% high. And also, I know that people in manufacturing are busy, and so they're not going to commit 6 days to something they're really not sure about. But it is a truly risk-free kind of final step there.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll be putting up some more details in a second at the end of this webinar, just to if anyone watching is interested in finding out more about those training sessions, or indeed have any other questions for you, Simon, about 123 Insight or MRP in general, I suppose. Hopefully we'll do more of these. I think they're a useful kind of step-by-step guide through MRP, and hopefully we'll see as many people as we can on the next one. But for now, Simon, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for watching. See you soon.
Thank you, Chris.